Guy Standing, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Your book, The Precariat, has really reached cult status, and you've recently spoken at Davos. Can you tell us, in a simple form, what is the precariat?
Well, you have to define the precariat in 3 dimensions. First, it consists of millions of people who are being subject to accept a life of unstable labor. Casual jobs, in and out of jobs, new forms of contracts, 0-hour contracts in this country and so on. That sort of unstable labor is essential, but is actually the least important characteristic of the precariat. Because if we had short-term jobs but security, and the jobs aren't very nice, well, that would be okay. But that is one aspect. More important is the fact that if you're in the precariat, you don't have an occupational narrative to give to your life. You don't have a feeling that you're becoming something and that you're in control of the way you develop your work through your life. And that, of course, is very frustrating, and it lowers your status in your family, in your community, and so on. Another factor is that the people in the precariat have to do a lot of work for labor that doesn't get counted as labor in statistics, in textbooks, in political rhetoric, and so on, but you have to do it. If you're in the precariat, for example, you have to network a lot. You have to wait around a lot. You have to retrain because the last lot of retraining wasn't any good or became obsolescent before you finish it. You have to apply to numerous jobs. It all uses up time. But it's not leisure, and it's stupid to call it leisure, but it's not recognized in our statistics. So one of the features of being in the precariat is you feel you're suffering from what I call a precariatized mind. You never know what's the optimum use of your time. Another aspect is that your level of education is almost certainly higher than the level of labor you can obtain. The second dimension is that you have to rely almost entirely on money wages. Money wages that are falling in real value in the United States, in Britain, in Germany, France, all of the OECD countries. Wages have been stagnant for 30 years. But you don't get access to security providing non-wage benefits. Pensions, paid holidays, paid medical leave, paid maternity leave, anything like that. And they've been losing what they had. The third aspect of this is that people in the precariat, because of this low wage and uncertainty in incomes, are living on the edge of unsustainable debt all the time. One mistake, one illness, one accident, boop, they could be out, homeless or in severe debt. And at the same time, all our countries, all the OECD countries, have been reforming their social security legislation to increase means testing and behavior testing. Because if you do means testing, what that means in practical terms is you only get a benefit if you prove you are poor. That's the means testing. But, of course, then supposing you are lazy and you choose to be poor. So they have introduced tests to see if you're job seeking enough, etc. And all of that leads to a form of insecurity, because you never know that you're going to get a benefit, but also what we call poverty traps. In this country, the poverty trap has been calculated by the government itself as about 80%. What that means is going from benefits, if you get them, into the sort of low-wage jobs, if you can get them, you actually only get a 20% extra income compared with what your benefits were. So they've been lowering benefits to increase the gap, but that makes it even worse in terms of poverty. And then there's what I call a precarity trap. The precarity trap arises from the fact that if you lose your job, you don't get a benefit the next day. You have to wait. And with a new universal credit in this country, you are forced to wait 6 weeks before you can even apply for those benefits.
Wow.
And then you're not likely to get any benefits for another 3 weeks. So the precariat faces chronic economic insecurity. And the third thing, which I regard as the most important in definitional terms, is that the precariat is losing rights. A right is something that you get through your status, through your being a member of society. The precariat is losing civil rights, for example. More and more, it needs to get access to legal advice, legal help, but it can't afford it. So it's losing the rights that we take for granted if we're not in the precariat. It's losing cultural rights because it can't belong to a community that can give identity and security. And it goes on with all forms of rights, and ultimately the worst of all, in a sense, is you don't have political rights, because there's no politics out there representing the precariat. Ergo, you're in trouble. And this leads to me, from what I regard as the most important characteristic of being in the precariat. You are reduced to being a supplicant. You have to ask for favors. You have to ask bureaucrats, please. You have to ask employers, please. You have to ask a partner, please, because I haven't got any money or whatever. And I think this is the most degrading aspect of the precariat. But that's how basically millions of people are now living.
It's very interesting. And alongside the rise of the precariat, we've also seen the rise of the gig economy and the share economy. How did those fit into the rise of the precariat?
Well, first, I would plead with anybody listening to this interview not to use the term gig economy.
All right.
A gig economy suggests that we're going to a rock festival or a rock band and we're going to have a real good gig, right? Well, for most people who are in this platform capitalist,
it's not as fun.
It's not as fun as being at a gig. And it gives it an over-romanticized image. It's the growing phenomenon in labor markets. Within the next 10 years, maybe within the next 5 years, 1 in every 3 labor transactions in Britain, in the United States, in any OECD country, 1 in every 3 will be done online. And it won't be a direct employer-employee relationship. It will be done through tasks contracted online. Already millions of people are in this crowd labor situation, and of course their wages are being forced down and down and down. And they're in a global labor market, so that somebody in Goa or somebody in Accra is effectively competing with someone in Birmingham or London or San Francisco. And that, of course, drives down the wages. And ultimately, this platform part of the economy is dragging down wages even more.
So they have to get numerous jobs, and then again, their labor is not always being counted?
The labor and work is not being counted as such, and it's one of the things I really desperately urge everybody to be demanding of politicians, which is reform our labor statistics. They're completely distorting reality. We don't have good labor statistics. If we reformed those and we overhauled and we actually measured what people are doing with their time, we'd have a different perspective on the problems faced by the precariat. But there's one point I want to make, which is that it's not all negative. Many people who enter the precariat don't want yesterday's labor. They don't want full-time, stable jobs stretching year after year after year. They want a life which is more creative and active and diversified. But the most important thing, and we're going to talk about that, I think, is having a sense of control over one's own time. And that is so vital for all of us.
So you're able to sometimes have a position in one of these share economies. Is that a better term for it?
I prefer platform capital.
Platform capital?
Yeah, because it's done through these apps. Everything is controlled through the apps.
And then at the same time, practice your creative passion or things along those lines.
That's right.
All right, so another topic that really is key right now in the labor market, though, is artificial intelligence. And by 2020, about 65% of employees believe that how they work is going to drastically change. And it's going to change the labor market in general, and also the tasks necessary to be successful. How is artificial intelligence going to affect the precariat specifically?
Well, I think not just AI, but all forms of robotics and automation are having an incredibly disruptive effect on employment and labor relations. I don't believe the Jeremiahs who say that the robots are going to replace us and we'll all have nothing to do, but it's very disruptive. The most important aspect from my narrative's point of view is that it's enabling the owners of the machines, the robots and all of that, to gain more of the income. What we're seeing around the world in every country which I know is that more and more of the income is going to the rentiers, the people who own property of various sorts. And I think what the biggest problem we're going to face is that more and more jobs will not pay enough on which to survive. And this is the crisis. And that's why I've argued in the books that our income distribution system as such has broken down. And we can address that. We can address it, but we've got to recognize that that is the problem.
We need people like you blazing trails for all of us to make sure that the world tips in the right direction. So thank you so much for blazing trails and being a legitimate trailblazer.
Thanks very much. Thank you.